I hunched over my lab desk, reviewing notes on fetal genetic modifications. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making my eyes tired as I flipped through pages of test results and developmental charts. Each number told a story of scientific achievement paired with moral compromise. Something I'd gotten good at rationalizing over the past few years. The coffee beside me had gone cold hours ago. I picked it up anyway, grimacing at the bitter taste. Our subjects were developing abilities far beyond normal human capacity, but the data showed troubling patterns I couldn't ignore much longer. I never joined the Nazi Party. That was a line I wouldn't cross, even as I worked on research that served their aims. My scientific curiosity kept me going despite the disturbing results piling up on my desk. I told myself I was serving science, not ideology, a distinction that felt more hollow with each passing day. Home offered no refuge. My wife Sage wore her Nazi Women's League pin proudly at dinner parties, where party officials filled our dining room with talk of racial purity and the glorious future of the Reich. I'd sit quietly, nodding along, offering non-committal responses when directly addressed. Our marriage had grown increasingly distant over the years. We slept in the same bed but might as well have lived in different countries. I made another note about Subject 17's cellular structures. The 7-year-old boy could lift objects 3 times his body weight, an achievement that would have seemed impossible just months ago. But the accompanying problems couldn't be dismissed as minor side effects. The laboratory door opened, and I looked up to see Atticus Glenn walking in with his typical quick steps. Atticus was my research partner, brilliant and completely unburdened by the ethical questions that kept me awake at night. "Any breakthroughs today, Randall?" he asked, his northern German accent making each word sound extra precise. I handed him my notes on Subject 17. The muscular enhancement protocol is showing remarkable results. Subject 17 can now lift 3 times his body weight. The cellular restructuring has gone beyond what we projected. Atticus looked through my findings with clear approval. His eyes lit up as he read the strength metrics. "Excellent. The Reichsfuhrer will be pleased to hear this. Imagine an entire division of soldiers with this capability." "There are complications," I added, pointing to the section on neural development. "The subjects are showing significant cognitive impairment. Their ability to follow complex instructions is deteriorating, and they're becoming more aggressive every day." Atticus frowned slightly. "That's unfortunate, but surely a manageable side effect, with proper conditioning." "It's more serious than that," I interrupted. "Subject 15 attacked Maddie Shepard just days earlier, nearly broke her arm before the guards could pull him off her. And he's only 6 years old." This caught Atticus's full attention. He set the papers down on my desk. I hadn't heard about this incident. Maddie didn't file an official report. She knows how important the program is. I ran a hand through my thinning hair. But the violent outbursts are happening more often, and the cognitive tests show a 30% decrease in problem-solving abilities across all subjects in the past month. "Perhaps we need to adjust the hormonal regimen," Atticus suggested, already thinking of solutions rather than questioning if we should continue at all. A different balance might preserve cognitive function while maintaining the physical enhancements. I nodded, though my enthusiasm for continuing the work weakened with each new complication. "I've started drafting a modified protocol. I'll have it ready for review tomorrow." Atticus patted my shoulder. "Good man. Science moves forward through hard work, Randall. Remember that." After he left, I stayed at my desk for several more hours, reviewing data and adjusting protocols. By the time I packed up my notes, the rest of the facility had gone quiet. The night shift guards nodded to me as I signed out and stepped into the cool evening air. Walking home had become my nightly ritual. 20 minutes alone with my thoughts before facing the strained silence of my house. The streets of Berlin were darker now with blackout regulations in effect. We weren't supposed to talk about the war news from the Eastern Front, but everyone could feel the mood in the city changing. I was about halfway home, passing what used to be Jewish-owned shops, when I heard a car engine behind me. A black Mercedes pulled alongside me, its tires crunching softly on the pavement. I slowed my steps as the rear window rolled down, revealing the stern face of an SS officer. "Dr. Brenner," the officer said flatly, "please get in the car." I stopped, caught off guard by this unexpected encounter. "May I ask what this is about?" The rear door opened. I could now see there were 2 officers inside. The one who had spoken, a tall, muscular man with close-cropped blonde hair, gave me an impatient look. "Your expertise is required immediately, Doctor. That's all you need to know for now." His tone made it clear this wasn't a request. I looked around the empty street, knowing that refusal would only create problems. With reluctance, I climbed into the back seat, finding myself sitting between the 2 SS officers. "I'm Obersturmführer Noah Patel," the blonde officer told me as the car pulled away from the curb. "This is Untersturmführer Robert Warner." He nodded toward the leaner, dark-haired man on my other side, who watched me with quiet intensity but offered no greeting. "Your expertise is needed for a matter of utmost importance to the Reich," Noah continued, his voice flat and businesslike. "We have a situation that requires your specific knowledge of genetic anomalies." The car moved quickly through the darkened city, taking turns I didn't recognize until we reached a part of Berlin I rarely visited. Eventually, we pulled up to what appeared to be an ordinary government building, though the heavy security presence suggested otherwise. Noah and Robert walked me inside, past multiple checkpoints where guards checked my identification with unusual thoroughness. We entered an elevator that required a key to operate, and descended 3 levels underground, much deeper than I had expected. When the doors opened, we stepped into a corridor unlike any research facility I'd seen before. The walls were bare concrete, the lighting harsh and clinical. Armed guards stood every few meters, their expressions blank as we passed. After going through several security doors, each requiring separate clearance, we entered what was clearly a medical wing. The equipment I glimpsed through partially open doors was cutting edge, far superior to what was available at my regular laboratory. "What exactly is this place?" I asked, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet hallway. "That information is classified," Robert replied, speaking for the first time. His quiet voice carried enough authority to discourage further questions. We stopped before a final set of doors, where Noah turned to face me directly. "Dr. Brenner, you're about to be briefed on a matter of the highest secrecy. What you see and hear beyond these doors does not exist outside this facility. Do you understand?" I nodded, my scientific curiosity now fully engaged, even as I felt nervous. "I understand." Noah studied my face for a moment, then pushed open the doors. We entered a large, brightly lit room filled with medical equipment and monitoring devices. Several people in lab coats looked up as we entered, their expressions tense and expectant. At the center of this activity stood a man who appeared to be in charge, his posture showing authority even in civilian clothes. He turned as we approached, looking at me with unusual intensity. "Dr. Brenner, thank you for joining us. I'm Glenn Moss." He extended his hand, which I shook automatically. "We have a situation that requires your immediate attention." The urgency in his voice was unmistakable. Whatever waited for me in this underground facility was clearly no ordinary medical case. As the doors closed behind me with a heavy thud, I sensed that something urgently awaited me here. Something that would challenge everything I thought I knew about our research. Glenn Moss had steel-gray hair and pale blue eyes that seemed to look through me rather than at me. The room fell quiet as I stood in the large, brightly lit space of the underground facility. "Dr. Brenner, thank you for coming on such short notice," Glenn said, his voice carrying a cultured tone that didn't match the clinical surroundings. "Your expertise is exactly what we need for this unusual situation." "What exactly am I dealing with here? Your officers weren't particularly forthcoming." "It's better seen than explained," Glenn replied. "Come with me." He led me through a set of double doors into a long corridor lined with examination rooms. The walls were bare concrete, painted institutional white, and the floor was polished to a high shine that reflected the harsh overhead lights. Our footsteps echoed as we walked. Medical staff moved purposefully between rooms, their faces betraying nothing of what they might be doing. "We've been conducting various experiments here," Glenn explained as we walked. "But this particular case is unlike anything we've encountered before. I believe it will interest you professionally." We stopped at a door marked simply Examination 3. Glenn paused with his hand on the handle and turned to me. "What you're about to see defies conventional medical understanding," he said. "I need your scientific perspective, not your emotional reaction." He pushed open the door, and I stepped into a room that looked like a standard medical examination area. The difference was the man strapped to the examination table in the center. He was thin, gaunt even, with sunken cheeks and dark circles under his eyes. His gray hair was matted with sweat and dirt. He wore what appeared to be torn clerical clothes, the remnants of a priest's collar still visible at his neck. But what made me stop in my tracks was his abdomen. Grossly distended, as if he were in the late stages of pregnancy. The anatomical impossibility of it made me wonder momentarily if I was hallucinating. "This is Wade Flores," Glenn said casually, as if introducing a colleague rather than a restrained prisoner. "Catholic priest. We caught him hiding Jews in his church basement. Very unfortunate choice on his part. But it's led to something quite remarkable." Glenn moved closer to the examination table. "You see, Dr. Brenner, Father Flores here appears to be pregnant." I stared at Glenn, certain I had misheard him. That's not possible. And yet, Glenn gestured toward Wade's swollen belly. I approached the table slowly. Wade's eyes fluttered open, bloodshot and filled with pain. He looked at me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "We've run tests," Glenn continued. "There's definitely something growing inside him. We need you to determine exactly what it is and how to extract it safely. The Reich is very interested in this phenomenon." I placed my hand tentatively on Wade's abdomen. The skin was hot to the touch and tight as a drum. I felt movement beneath my fingers, distinct and purposeful. Wade grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. His fingers were cold and bony against my skin. "It's an angel," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "God's messenger. It came to me in my cell, bright as the sun. Said I was chosen." I tried to pull my hand away, but Wade held tight. "It's not for them," he rasped. "Not for their experiments. It brings judgment." Glenn roughly broke Wade's grip on my wrist. "Enough of your delusions, priest." I stepped back, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. "I need to run some tests, an ultrasound, at minimum." "Of course." Glenn nodded to a technician waiting by the door. "Everything you need is at your disposal." Over the next hour, I examined Wade thoroughly. His vital signs were erratic: elevated heart rate, fluctuating blood pressure, fever. But it was the ultrasound that truly stunned me. On the monitor appeared what looked undeniably like a fully developed fetus, surrounded by an unusual brightness that made the image difficult to interpret clearly. The machine's readings kept glitching, numbers jumping erratically. I struggled to find words. Miraculous? Glenn suggested, watching the screen with keen interest. Impossible, I finished. But it's happening nonetheless. I pointed to several areas on the screen. The fetus appears fully developed, but there's no placenta, no umbilical cord. I don't understand how it's receiving nutrients or oxygen. Wade moaned softly on the table. I turned to Glenn. We need to perform a cesarean immediately. His body isn't designed for childbirth. He'll die if we don't extract whatever this is. Glenn's thin lips curved into a smile. Excellent. Prepare for surgery. As I washed my hands in the adjoining prep room, Glenn spoke quietly beside me. Think of it, Brenner. If what the priest says has even a grain of truth, some kind of superior being, imagine what it could mean for our research. Living gods for the Reich. I didn't respond. My mind was racing with scientific possibilities and ethical horrors in equal measure. A woman in surgical scrubs entered the prep room. She was tall and severe-looking, with black hair pulled back in a tight bun. Dr. Taylor Black. Glenn introduced her. She'll be assisting you. Taylor nodded curtly. I've prepared the surgical suite. The patient has been sedated and prepped. The next 12 hours were a blur of preparation, monitoring, and careful planning. Wade's condition grew steadily worse as we worked. His vital signs weakened, and the movement in his abdomen became more agitated, as if whatever was inside sensed his deterioration and wanted out. Taylor proved to be an excellent assistant, precise and unflappable. She anticipated my needs before I voiced them and maintained a professional detachment I envied. We worked largely in silence, communicating in the shorthand of experienced medical professionals. Finally, we were ready. Wade lay unconscious on the operating table, his swollen abdomen prepped and draped. Glenn and several others watched from behind a glass partition. Beginning primary incision, I announced, pressing the scalpel to Wade's skin. The moment the blade broke the surface, something extraordinary happened. Light, brilliant white light, poured from the incision like liquid sunshine. I squinted against its intensity but forced myself to continue. What the hell is that? Taylor whispered beside me. The light grew brighter as I deepened the incision. It didn't bleed like a normal surgical cut. Instead, this radiance spilled out, illuminating the entire room. The monitoring equipment went haywire, screens flickering before shutting down completely. I worked as quickly as I dared, opening layer after layer of tissue. The anatomy inside Wade's abdomen was unlike anything I'd ever seen. No reproductive organs, no structures that could possibly support a pregnancy. Instead, there was simply a pocket of light, and within it, a shape. With trembling hands, I reached into the cavity. My fingers touched something solid amid the brilliance. Carefully, I extracted a small form, a perfect, faintly glowing infant. It didn't cry, it didn't struggle. It simply lay in my hands, looking around the room with aware, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything. Its tiny face was serene, beautiful in a way that transcended ordinary human features. My God, I breathed. Behind me, I heard Taylor drop a surgical instrument with a clatter. The infant turned its gaze to me. Those eyes, they weren't the unfocused eyes of a newborn. They were ancient, knowing. They saw me completely, Not just my physical form, but everything beneath it. My thoughts, my doubts, my compromises. In that moment, with the impossible child in my hands, I understood with terrible clarity that I had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. I watched as Glenn pointed toward a clear containment unit that 2 lab technicians had wheeled into the surgical suite. "Put it in there," he ordered, his eyes never leaving the glowing infant in my hands. The child seemed impossibly light as I held it, warm but not hot despite the radiance coming from its skin. I found myself reluctant to hand it over, though I couldn't explain why. One of the technicians approached with gloved hands, looking at me expectantly. Behind me, Wade made a weak sound. I turned to see him reaching out with trembling fingers, blood seeping through the hastily closed surgical incision on his abdomen. "Please," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the beeping monitors. "The angel, not for your experiments. It brings judgment." I stepped closer to Wade, still cradling the infant. "Save your strength. You need to rest." "The containment unit. Now," Glenn said sharply from across the room. Wade's fingers brushed against my lab coat. "Promise me you'll understand. Not a weapon, a message." The monitor tracking Wade's vitals began to alarm as his blood pressure dropped dangerously. I quickly passed the infant to the waiting technician and turned my attention to Wade, calling for plasma and adrenaline. His skin had gone gray, his breathing shallow. "Stay with me," I urged, injecting medication directly into his IV line. "Taylor, get me the crash cart." Taylor moved quickly, but I knew it was too late. Wade's body had been through too much trauma. The pregnancy, if that was the right word for what had happened to him, had taken everything he had. His eyes found mine one last time, a strange peace settling over his features despite the chaos around him. "Remember," he whispered before his eyes glazed over. I continued resuscitation efforts for another 20 minutes, but it was futile. Wade was gone, his body finally giving out after what must have been months of impossible strain. "Time of death, 22:47, I said quietly, stepping back from the table. Glenn had been watching from the observation window, his attention divided between Wade's failed resuscitation and the infant, now secured in the containment unit. He entered the surgical suite once Wade was pronounced dead. "Have the body taken to pathology for full examination," he instructed Taylor. "I want to know exactly how this happened." He turned to me. "Dr. Brenner, you'll be heading the research team for the subject. I expect daily reports." I nodded, too exhausted to argue. My surgical gown was stained with blood and amniotic fluid that seemed to shimmer under the harsh lights. Over the next week, I rarely left the facility. The infant, now officially designated Subject Angel by Jade Freeman's research team, remained in its containment unit in a specially designed observation room. Unlike a normal newborn, it didn't cry, didn't sleep, and showed no interest in the formula we offered. It simply watched us with eyes that seemed impossibly aware. On the 5th day, I stood beside Jade as she attempted to take a blood sample from the infant. "This is the 3rd needle today," she said, her voice tight with frustration. As she pressed the needle against the infant's arm, it shattered, the metal splintering as if it had struck diamond. "Exactly like the others. Have you tried a different approach?" I asked. "We've tried everything short of a diamond drill," she replied, making notes on her tablet. "Look at this." She showed me footage from earlier testing. A controlled electrical current, enough to cause pain but not permanent damage in a normal subject, was applied to the infant. It showed no reaction whatsoever, not even a change in its steady gaze. The most remarkable thing is the cellular structure. Jade continued, leading me to a microscope where a slide waited. We managed to get a skin cell sample when we first brought it in. Watch what happens. Through the microscope, I could see what appeared to be normal human cells. As Jade added a drop of acid to the slide, I expected to see cellular breakdown. Instead, the cells seemed to repair themselves instantly, regenerating any damaged portions. It's unlike anything I've ever seen, I admitted. The tissue resembles human cells, but with this regenerative capability. We've been calling it accelerated molecular reconstruction, Jade said, unable to hide the excitement in her voice. If we could isolate the mechanism responsible. Any progress on understanding its biological needs? I asked, glancing through the observation window where the infant lay, its glow casting soft light throughout the containment unit. That's another mystery, Jade said. It doesn't appear to need food, water, or sleep. Metabolic readings are stable, but unlike any human patterns we've recorded. It's as if it's sustained by something we can't measure. On the 8th day after the delivery, Glenn called a meeting with the research team. I arrived to find him reviewing the data we'd collected, his expression hardening with each page he turned. A week of passive observation has given us interesting data, but no actionable insights, he said, closing the folder. We need to move to more dynamic testing protocols. What did you have in mind? I asked, though I already felt a knot forming in my stomach. Glenn leaned forward. I want to place the subject among the modified children, see how they interact. I couldn't hide my shock. The modified children are unstable. Many show aggressive tendencies and unpredictable behavior. It would be reckless to expose them to the infant. Reckless. Glenn's voice dropped dangerously. What's reckless, Dr. Brenner, is wasting time when we have potentially the most significant discovery in human history. The modified children are test subjects. This is what they're for. But we don't know how the infant might react, I argued, or how the children might respond to its presence. There are too many unknowns. Jade interjected, we could start with controlled exposure, one child at a time with full safety protocols. Glenn shook his head. I want natural interaction. Put it in the playroom with subjects 20 through 22, tomorrow morning. I stood up. This is moving too fast. We need more baseline data before... Are you questioning orders, Dr. Brenner? Glenn cut me off, his eyes cold. Because I can find someone else to head this research if you lack the necessary commitment. The room fell silent. I knew what happened to people who were deemed uncooperative. Wade's fate was evidence enough of how the Reich dealt with those who opposed them. No, I said finally, sitting back down. I'm not questioning orders. I'll prepare the protocols for tomorrow's test. Good, Glenn said, his expression softening slightly. I expect you all to be present. This could be a breakthrough moment. As the meeting disbanded, I gathered my notes, trying to ignore the sense of dread building inside me. Whatever Wade had meant about judgment, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were moving towards something dangerous, something beyond our understanding or control. That night, I stayed late reviewing everything we knew about the infant and the modified children. Subjects 20 through 22 were among the most physically enhanced, but also the most emotionally volatile. Subject 22 in particular had shown concerning levels of aggression toward caretakers. As I prepared the observation protocols, I couldn't help but wonder if we were making a terrible mistake. The infant, with its unwavering gaze and impossible biology, was clearly more than just an anomaly of nature. And tomorrow, we would be placing it in a situation that could easily turn volatile. I completed the necessary paperwork, authorizing the test while noting my concerns for the record. Not that it would matter if things went wrong. The Reich would ensure any failures disappeared from the records as efficiently as Wade's body had been removed from the surgical suite. I watched through the observation glass as nurses Destiny Braun and Glenn Dixon placed the glowing infant in the playroom with 3 modified children. The room had been specially prepared. Soft mats covered the floor, a few basic toys were scattered about, and cameras mounted in every corner documented each moment. The 3 children already inside sat in different corners, each lost in their own world, products of our genetic modifications. My attention fixed on subject 22, an 8-year-old boy with sandy hair and unusually developed muscles visible even beneath his gray facility jumpsuit. We'd enhanced his strength to 3 times normal capacity, but the modifications had made him unpredictable and often violent. He'd broken an orderly's arm last week during a routine examination. Subject 22 looked up as Destiny set the infant down on a mat in the center of the room. The infant, still glowing with that soft, impossible light, sat upright without support, something no normal baby could do. It wore only a simple white gown we'd fashioned after standard attempts at drawing blood had failed. Subject 22 is showing interest, I said, into the recording device clipped to my lab coat. Heart rate elevated, but within expected parameters. Glenn backed away slowly toward the door, while Destiny made final adjustments to the infant's gown. When she finished, she followed Glenn, both moving with the practiced caution of staff who worked with unpredictable subjects. The airlock door hissed shut behind them. Subject 22 stood up. My muscles went tight. I stepped closer to the emergency protocol button that would flood the room with sedative gas if needed. He's approaching the infant, I noted, my finger hovering over the button. The boy walked with deliberate steps toward the glowing child. The other 2 modified children, a 6-year-old girl with enhanced lung capacity and a 7-year-old boy with accelerated healing abilities, remained in their corners, watching with blank expressions. Subject 22 stopped directly in front of the infant. I expected him to lash out, to grab or strike as he'd done with other subjects placed in his vicinity. My hand hovered over the emergency button, ready to press it at the first sign of aggression. But he didn't attack. He simply stared, his face changing from its usual mask of anger to something I'd never seen on him before. Wonder. His enhanced muscles relaxed. His breathing slowed. The infant looked up at him with eyes that seemed impossibly old. Not the unfocused gaze of a newborn, but something aware and knowing. I'd noted this anomaly in my reports, but seeing it now in this context made my skin prickle with unease. Subject Angel is making eye contact with Subject 22, I said into my recorder. Subject 22 appears calm, non-aggressive. The infant raised its tiny hand toward Subject 22's face. The motion was slow, deliberate, not the random flailing of a normal infant. Subject 22 didn't flinch or back away as the small, glowing fingers approached his cheek. I heard the observation room door open behind me and sensed someone enter, but I couldn't look away from what was happening. "What's it doing?" Glenn asked, now standing beside me at the window. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The infant's fingers made contact with Subject 22's face. Light, brilliant, impossible light, exploded from the point of contact. It flooded the room, pouring through the observation window and washing over us in waves. I squeezed my eyes shut, but the light burned through my eyelids, white-hot and blinding. I stumbled backward, hands over my face, spots dancing across my vision. Someone shouted. Equipment crashed to the floor. "I can't see," Destiny cried out somewhere to my left. "Stay where you are," I called back, blinking furiously, trying to clear my vision. Gradually, shapes began to form again. Blurry outlines resolving into the equipment, the walls, the observation window. When I could see clearly enough, I rushed back to the glass and looked into the playroom. The 3 modified children lay on the floor, perfectly still. Subject 22 was sprawled on his back, arms and legs splayed outward. The other 2 had collapsed where they'd been sitting, and the infant was gone. Where is it? I pressed my hands against the glass, searching every corner of the sealed room. Where did it go? Glenn was already at the control panel, triggering the security lockdown. Red lights began to flash in the hallway. A siren wailed, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. Full facility lockdown. Glenn shouted into the intercom. Subject Angel is missing. I repeat, Subject Angel is missing. All personnel to search stations. This is not a drill. I turned to the monitoring equipment, checking the vital signs of the children in the room. All 3 flatlined. We need medical in there now, I shouted. Glenn was already unlocking the airlock door. Dixon, get a medical team in there right now. Check those kids. Destiny was on the phone, her voice shaky but professional. Medical emergency in test room C. 3 subjects down, no vitals reading. I joined the rush into the playroom, heading straight for subject 22 while Destiny checked the girl and Glenn went to the other boy. I pressed my fingers to subject 22's neck, searching for a pulse I already knew wouldn't be there. His skin was cool to the touch. No pulse, I confirmed. Pupils fixed and dilated. Similar confirmations came from Destiny and Glenn. How could this happen? Destiny asked, her voice barely above a whisper. They were fine just a minute ago. And where's the infant? Glenn looked around the sealed room with growing alarm. There's no way out of here except through that airlock. Medical staff flooded in with emergency equipment. But it was clear within minutes that resuscitation would be futile. Meanwhile, security personnel began a methodical search of the facility. I stepped back, looking at the spot where the infant had been sitting. There was nothing. No mark, no trace, nothing to indicate what had happened or where it had gone. Hours passed in a blur of activity. Every room, corridor, vent shaft, and storage closet in the facility was searched. Security footage from every camera was reviewed. I stood in the monitoring center with Glenn and the head of security, watching the playback from the test room. On screen, we could see the infant raise its hand to subject 22's face. Then came the flash of light that overwhelmed the camera. When the image cleared seconds later, the children were on the floor and the infant was gone. Play it, frame by frame, I instructed. The technician complied, advancing the footage millisecond by millisecond. The light flared, grew, and then nothing. No transition, no movement, no indication of how the infant had left or where it had gone. It's impossible, the technician muttered. It's like it just stopped existing. After 6 hours of searching, Glenn Moss arrived from Berlin. He strode into the command center, face tight with controlled fury. Someone explained to me how an infant disappeared from a sealed room, he demanded, and why 3 valuable test subjects are dead. No one had an answer. Oliver Rivera, our facility's medical examiner, joined us 2 hours later with preliminary findings on the children. I've never seen anything like it, he said, sliding autopsy photos across the table. No physical trauma, no signs of asphyxiation or cardiac event. Brain scans show unusual activity patterns right before death. It's as if their entire nervous system just shut down all at once. Cause of death? Glenn pressed. Oliver ran a hand over his bald head. Unknown. I'll need to run more tests. And the infant? Glenn turned to me. I shook my head. Still no sign of it anywhere in the facility. The search continued through the night, expanding to the surrounding area, but yielded nothing. By morning, Glenn ordered a cover-up. The official report would state that an experimental procedure had gone wrong, resulting in the deaths of 3 test subjects. No mention of the infant would appear in any documentation sent up the chain. That night, alone in my quarters, I pulled out a blank notebook I kept hidden between my mattress and frame. I wrote down everything I had witnessed, every detail I could remember about the infant from the moment it had emerged from Wade's body to its disappearance. As I wrote, Wade's words came back to me. He'd called it an angel, insisted it wasn't for our experiments. I dismissed him as delirious, desperate, clutching at religious fantasy in his final moments. But now I understood. Whatever had been born in that operating room wasn't human. It wasn't a weapon to be harnessed or a specimen to be studied. It was something else entirely. Something beyond our understanding or control. Something that could vanish from a sealed room. That could take life with a touch. I wrote until my hand cramped, filling page after page with observations and questions. When I finished, I sat back, exhausted but clear-headed for the first time since the infant had disappeared. Wade had known. Somehow, he had known what the child truly was. And now it was gone, vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared, leaving 3 dead children and a facility full of scientists with no answers. What we had witnessed was extraordinary, perhaps divine, perhaps something else entirely. But one thing was certain. It had never been ours to keep or control. And whatever purpose it served, whatever mission it had, was now continuing somewhere beyond our reach. I received transfer orders to a remote Austrian facility just 2 days after the incident. The document sat on my desk, its official seal in cold bureaucratic language, making it clear this wasn't a request, but a command. My hands trembled as I read it again. The facility's name meant nothing to me. A series of numbers and a location tucked away in the Austrian mountains, far from Berlin, far from witnesses. I knew what this meant. They were burying me, and possibly the entire project. After losing the modified children and the infant vanishing without a trace, I had become a liability. Too many questions remained unanswered, too many impossible events witnessed. The signatures at the bottom of the page belonged to people much higher in the Reich's hierarchy than Glenn Moss. My quarters felt suddenly foreign as I packed my belongings, pulling books from shelves and clothes from drawers. I worked methodically, trying to focus on the mundane task rather than what awaited me in Austria. Everyone who knew about the angel would be scattered or silenced. I had no illusions about my own fate. As I placed the last of my research journals into a leather satchel, something changed in the air around me. A familiar brightness began to fill my study, starting as a soft glow that grew until it washed out the colors of the room. My breath caught in my chest. I knew that light. I turned slowly, already knowing what I would see. The infant floated before me, suspended in midair, but changed. It appeared slightly older now, perhaps like a toddler of 1 or 2 years, its small body surrounded by radiance that seemed to come from within rather than shine upon it. Its eyes held the same awareness I'd seen in the operating room. But now there was something more. Purpose, understanding. My legs gave way beneath me. I fell to my knees, convinced my final judgment had arrived. The child had come for retribution. I had helped extract it from Wade's body. I had authorized the tests with the modified children. Their deaths were on my conscience. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice barely audible even to myself. for everything we did to you, for what I allowed to happen. The child angel regarded me with eyes that seemed to see through flesh and bone into whatever passed for my soul. It raised one small hand and reached toward me. I didn't flinch or pull away. If death was coming, I would face it. The tiny fingers touched my forehead with gentleness I didn't deserve. The contact was warm, like sunlight on skin, and then, instead of pain or ending, my mind filled with images, clear as reality but impossible to mistake for memory. I saw the modified children, their bodies no longer twisted by our experiments, running and laughing in a place filled with light. They were at peace, whole in a way they had never been in our facility. Wade appeared, his face no longer gaunt with suffering, but radiant with joy. Surrounded by the Jewish families he had protected, they embraced him, honored him, welcomed him home. The visions shifted, showing me Berlin in ruins. The mighty symbols of the Reich crumbled to dust. I saw Hitler's bunker, the dictator's final moments, the fall of everything the Nazis had built, the judgment of history on our actions. The flood of understanding continued, washing through me with force but not violence. I saw the angel for what it was. Not a weapon as the Reich had hoped, not exactly the harbinger Wade had feared, but something beyond human categories altogether. Something that offered both judgment and mercy in the same moment. When the light finally faded, I remained kneeling on the floor of my study, gasping for breath. I was still alive, but something fundamental had changed. The certainties that had guided my life, scientific materialism, the compartmentalization that let me work on horrific projects while considering myself a good man, had been swept away. I felt hollowed out and then filled with something new. I rose unsteadily to my feet. The angel was gone, but on my desk, where nothing had been moments before, lay a sealed envelope. Inside, I found Swiss identity papers for someone named Randall Meyer. The photograph was mine, though I had never posed for it. Travel documents, train tickets, and enough cash to last several months accompanied the papers. A way out, a chance for something else. I spent the next hours in a daze, going through the motions of packing only what I could carry inconspicuously. When darkness fell, I wrote a brief note to Sage. Our marriage had been empty for years, yet some obligation made me leave those few cryptic lines. I didn't explain where I was going. I hardly knew myself. I simply wrote that I couldn't continue our life together or my work. She would understand what that meant in the Reich, that I had become a traitor, a deserter. Perhaps she would report me, perhaps not. That night, I slipped away from Berlin like a thief. The city that had been my home for decades felt alien now, its streets filled with shadows and its buildings monuments to a doomed ideology. With each step away from my old life, the weight on my chest lightened slightly. The journey to the Swiss border took 3 days. My heart pounded at every checkpoint, certain that someone would spot the forgery in my documents, that questions would be asked I couldn't answer. Yet somehow, officials merely glanced at my papers, nodded, and waved me through. Their eyes seemed to slide away from my face, as if something made them unable or unwilling to look too closely. On the train crossing into Switzerland, I sat alone in my compartment, watching German territory recede through the window. The mountains rose around me, solid and ancient, caring nothing for the temporary empires of men. For the first time in years, I took a full breath. I had no idea what awaited me, only that I had been given something I didn't deserve, a second chance. I had established a new life in Geneva 6 months after escaping Berlin. My small apartment overlooked a quiet street near Lake Geneva, where morning mist rose off the water like spirits finding their way home. The Swiss city offered anonymity that I desperately needed, a place where no one questioned my accent or my past. My new identity as Randall Meyer had taken root, and with each passing day, Dr. Brenner of the Reich's Research Division faded further into shadow. I worked at a small medical clinic 3 blocks from my apartment, treating refugees who had managed to flee the war. The clinic itself was modest, just 6 examination rooms in a converted townhouse with peeling paint and worn wooden floors that creaked under my feet. Director Hoffman had hired me without asking too many questions, grateful simply to have another doctor willing to work long hours for little pay. The refugees arrived with haunted eyes that reminded me of Wade's in those final moments, eyes that had seen too much suffering. I had abandoned genetic research forever. The very thought of laboratories now filled me with revulsion. My microscope, once my most prized possession, remained packed away in a trunk I couldn't bring myself to open. The equations and formulas that had once consumed my thoughts had been replaced by simpler concerns. A child's fever, an old man's cough, a woman's infected wound. These problems had clear solutions, untainted by moral ambiguity. My hands, once used for experimentation that I could no longer justify, now healed the wounded and sick. I noticed the change in myself most acutely during delicate procedures. The steady precision remained, but the clinical detachment had vanished. I felt each patient's pain as my own, their relief becoming my relief. Sometimes I looked down at my hands as if they belonged to someone else entirely, someone better than the man I had been. "You have gentle hands, doctor," a Polish mother told me one afternoon as I stitched a cut on her son's forehead. Not like the others. I had heard this comment often from my patients. An elderly man with tuberculosis had once gripped my wrist and whispered, "You understand suffering." I never corrected them or explained. How could I tell them that my gentleness came from guilt, from knowledge of what hands like mine had done in service to monstrous ideals? "I just try to cause no additional pain," I replied, tying off the final stitch with care. My colleagues noticed it too, this difference in my approach. Dr. Bauer, a Swiss physician who had trained in Vienna, once observed me treating a child with a dislocated shoulder. "Meyer, you have the strangest bedside manner I've ever seen," he said later as we shared coffee in the break room. "You look at these people like you're seeking forgiveness." I merely shrugged and changed the subject. How could I explain that in each face I treated, I sometimes saw Wade's eyes or the modified children we had sacrificed in pursuit of progress? At night, after my shifts ended, I would climb the narrow staircase to my apartment's roof. There, I sat on an old wooden chair I'd brought up for this purpose and gazed at the stars scattered across the sky like luminous dust. In those quiet moments, I would recall the angel's touch, the warmth that had spread through me, the visions that had broken and remade me. The Reich had wanted a weapon, something to harness and control. Wade had feared it was a harbinger of death. We had both been wrong. What I had witnessed was something offering both judgment and mercy. Judgment for what humanity had done, mercy in the chance to begin again. I often wondered if others who had encountered the infant had been given the same opportunity for redemption. But I knew in my heart that I was alone in this knowledge. The Swiss winter gave way to spring, and I continued my work at the clinic. Each day brought new refugees with stories that turned my stomach, accounts of camps and cruelties that confirmed the visions the angel had shown me. The Reich was collapsing under the weight of its own evil, just as I had seen. I lived with the knowledge of witnessing something beyond scientific explanation. moments, especially when treating the most desperate cases, when I felt a trace of that same presence, a warmth that guided my hands, a clarity that cut through complexity. Science had no language for what I had experienced, no framework to contain it. My mind, once so ordered and certain, now held contradictions I had learned to accept rather than resolve. As the sole survivor of that underground facility, I carried the truth of what happened in that lab, where briefly the divine had intersected with mankind's darkest ambitions. Sometimes I wondered what had become of Glenn, of Taylor, of my other colleagues. Had they been buried along with the project? Had they met fates worse than mine? I scanned the refugee faces, half expecting to see someone from my past, but they never came. Though I never spoke of what I had seen, patients sometimes looked at me strangely, as if they could sense something different in my gaze. An old rabbi I treated for pneumonia once paused as I listened to his breathing. "You have seen something, haven't you?" he asked in a whisper. "Something not meant for mortal eyes." I adjusted my stethoscope and prescribed his medication without answering. What could I say that wouldn't sound like madness? How could I explain that I had helped deliver an angel from the body of a tortured priest? That I had seen it transform a violent child with a touch? That it had shown me both the death and rebirth of worlds? My colleagues attributed my reservation to war trauma, a common enough condition among Europeans in those days. Director Hoffman once suggested I consult with the clinic's psychiatrist, but I declined with a polite smile. My silence was not a symptom to be treated, but a choice. Perhaps the first truly moral choice I had made. On warm evenings, I sometimes walked along Lake Geneva, watching families picnic on its shores and children splash in its shallows. I observed their ordinary joy with the wonder of someone seeing such things for the first time. In Berlin, I had been blind to the simple miracle of human connection, too consumed by ambition and the pursuit of knowledge at any cost. My eyes now held a wisdom and peace that had been absent during my days in Berlin. I could see it myself when I caught my reflection in windows or in the small mirror above my bathroom sink. The worry lines remained, but something had softened in my gaze. Patients trusted me instinctively, seeing something in my eyes that I couldn't fully articulate myself. Perhaps the understanding that came from having been broken and remade. My life had been transformed by an experience I alone understood. An encounter that had revealed both the depths of human depravity and the possibility of grace. Each day as I treated my patients, each night as I looked up at the stars, I carried this knowledge within me. Not as a burden, but as a light guiding me forward into a life I had never imagined possible.